Welcome to Mindlight Mixtape. If you'd like to hear the extended version with ambient sound for sleep or study, visit our channel. Now, let's begin.
Imagine it's a quiet evening. You're sipping tea, scrolling through your phone, and someone knocks at the door. A friendly volunteer asks if you'd be willing to place a small sticker in your window supporting a neighborhood safety campaign. It seems harmless, almost charming. And so you say yes. A week later, the same person returns. This time they ask if you'd consider putting a large sign in your yard promoting the same cause. And surprisingly, you say yes again. Why? Because your mind has already made a tiny shift. This is the essence of the foot-in-the-door technique, a subtle but powerful psychological trick where a small yes makes you more likely to say yes again, even to much larger requests. The concept was first tested in a 1966 experiment by Friedman and Fraser. Researchers called homeowners and asked them to put a small sign in their window. Later, they asked those same people to put up a giant billboard. The ones who said yes to the little sign were significantly more likely to agree to the big one. They had mentally committed to the cause, or at least to the idea of themselves as someone who helps. This isn't just about signs, it's about identity. When we agree to something small, our brains start reshaping how we see ourselves. I'm a helpful person. I care about safety. I'm part of this cause. And once that identity shift begins, we try to stay consistent with it. Saying yes again just feels right, even when the ask is much bigger. You'll find this technique used everywhere. Charities ask for a quick petition signature before asking for a donation. Marketers offer free samples before pitching a pricey subscription. A friend starts by asking if you'll come help for a few minutes, and you end up there all day. It starts with the smallest of steps, but behind that step is a doorway quietly opening wider. Let's explore what happens once you've stepped inside. One of the deepest human instincts is the need to be consistent. Once we've made a choice, no matter how small, we feel an inner pull to behave in ways that match that decision. It's not just about what others think of us. It's about what we think of ourselves. Imagine you agree to help a friend move a single chair into their new apartment. It's not a big deal, right? But then you're asked to help with a few more boxes. Then a sofa, then the whole move. Somewhere in the process, your brain starts whispering, I guess I'm the kind of person who shows up, I'm helpful. I follow through. So when the requests keep coming, they don't feel like impositions. They feel like natural extensions of who you've become. This is why the foot-in-the-door technique works so reliably. It isn't manipulation in the sinister sense. It's more of a dance with human nature. In the world of sales, this technique is everywhere. A company might ask for your email address to receive a 10% discount. Later, they invite you to a webinar, then a purchase, then a subscription. At every stage, you're not just doing what they ask, you're reaffirming who you are, someone interested in the product, someone engaged, someone committed. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, who studied persuasion in depth, explains that we feel psychological pressure to behave in ways that align with our past actions. If we've taken a stance, even privately, our future decisions will often bend to match it. It feels uncomfortable to say no after we've already said yes, even if the new ask is wildly different. Think of it like laying down a path. The first stone is small, but the moment it's placed, the direction is set. More stones follow, each one easier to add, until the trail leads to places we never intended to go. It's not just about getting a yes, it's about getting the first yes, because that's the one that quietly rewires everything that comes next. Let's explore how this trick is used in daily life, sometimes without us even knowing. This technique isn't just something you'll encounter in marketing campaigns or sales scripts. It's everywhere in relationships, social causes, even self-improvement. It's in the way we make promises, agree to favors, and commit to routines we didn't mean to start. You might find it in a conversation with someone close to you. They begin with a gentle ask, would you mind checking in on me this weekend? It feels small, thoughtful, even. Then it's, could you come over for a bit? Then could you stay the night? Each yes becomes a stepping stone toward a deeper commitment. Maybe one you didn't see coming. It happens in politics and activism too. Movements often begin by asking for a single expression of support, a social media post, a signature, a tiny donation. But with each act of agreement, you align your identity more closely with the cause. I'm a supporter. I'm part of this. And once that identity takes root, you're more likely to show up, contribute, vote, or even advocate. The technique can be used for good or for manipulation. Some cults and high-control groups begin this way. Not with a dramatic leap, but with a small commitment. Join us for dinner. Just one seminar. Just read this pamphlet. And each yes nudges the door a little farther open. But this isn't a call for fear. It's an invitation for awareness. Because once you recognize this technique, you can make choices that are deliberate, not automatic. You can pause after the first ask and ask yourself, is this really me, or am I being led? And you can also use the same principle to your benefit. Want to exercise more? Just commit to 2 minutes. Want to build a habit? Start with the tiniest, most laughable version of it. Because once you say yes to that first, small step, the rest gets easier. Your mind likes to keep the trail going. The foot in the door technique isn't magic, but it does tap into something ancient and powerful. The deep need we all have to be consistent with who we believe we are. And now, we move on to the next trick your brain doesn't even realize is happening. You're standing in a dimly lit auction house. A worn leather chair sits under a spotlight. The auctioneer begins. Do I hear $1,000? You were thinking $200, maybe $300. But now, somehow, $1,000 has set the tone for everything that follows. Even if you don't realize it, your brain has already latched onto that first number, and it's quietly reshaping your expectations. This is anchoring bias, a powerful psychological phenomenon where the first piece of information we encounter becomes the mental anchor we compare everything else to. Even when it's arbitrary, even when it's wrong, it's not just about numbers, either. Anchoring happens anytime a starting point distorts your judgment. A real estate agent shows you a wildly overpriced house before showing you what they really want to sell. Suddenly, the second home seems like a bargain, even though it's still expensive. A car salesperson starts with the deluxe package, heated seats, sunroof, top-tier audio. By the time they show you the mid-range version, it feels like you're saving money. But the anchor has already pulled you deeper than you meant to go. And it's not just sales. Anchoring happens in negotiations, job offers, even friendships. Let's say someone asks, would you be willing to donate $100 to support a cause? Even if you say no, your brain uses that number as the frame of reference. So when they ask for $20, it suddenly feels small, reasonable, because $100 came first. Researchers Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman demonstrated this effect using a rigged roulette wheel. Participants were asked to spin the wheel and then guess how many African countries are in the United Nations. When the wheel landed on a high number, the guesses were higher. When it landed on a low number, the guesses were lower. The wheel was meaningless, totally unrelated, but still it anchored their thinking. Anchoring bias works because the human brain loves shortcuts. It doesn't always calculate value from scratch. Instead, it adjusts from a starting point, even when that point is completely random. And once that anchor drops into place, it doesn't just sit there, it tugs. Anchors aren't just for auctions, real estate, or tricky salespeople. They show up quietly in everyday decisions, often in places we'd never expect. Imagine you're shopping online for a pair of shoes. You see a sleek pair for $400. That's absurd, you think. But then you scroll and find another pair for $150. It still might be too much, but it feels better somehow, less shocking, more reasonable. That's anchoring at work. The first number, however outrageous, reshaped your mental scale. Even in grocery stores, anchors affect you. Ever noticed a sign that says limit 12 per customer? That number doesn't just restrict, it influences. Shoppers buy more when a high limit is posted, because the anchor subtly suggests what's normal. It's not just prices and quantities. Anchoring even affects how we feel about ourselves. Consider this. You're told the average person your age exercises 3 times a week. Even if that number is invented, your brain locks it in as a benchmark. If you work out once a week, you now feel behind. But if you'd been told the average was once a month, You'd feel like a health god. Same action, different anchor, very different feelings. Now let's take it deeper into relationships. Imagine someone describes a person to you like this. He's a bit rude and self-centered, but incredibly successful and generous. Now flip the order. He's incredibly successful and generous, but a bit rude and self-centered. Same traits, same person. But that first phrase, the anchor, colors everything that follows. Psychologists call this the primacy effect, closely tied to anchoring. Whatever we hear first, that becomes the lens. The rest gets filtered through it, and that's the trickiest part. Anchoring isn't just about facts. It shapes emotions too. It can affect how you feel about money, people, opportunities, even your own abilities. A test that starts with easy questions feels manageable. One that starts with hard ones, suddenly overwhelming. Every day you're surrounded by anchors. Suggested donation amounts, menu prices, job descriptions, friend comparisons and before photos. And whether or not you see them, they shape your sense of what's acceptable, normal, or fair. The key is awareness. Once you know the trick, the anchor loses its weight, but there's still one more thing anchoring bias can do, and this one hits deeper than most. There's a more personal side to anchoring bias, one that doesn't involve money or marketing at all. It happens when someone labels you. When you hear, maybe as a child, that you're the shy one, or the troublemaker, or the gifted one. That first identity becomes an anchor, and even if it isn't accurate, it can shape how you behave for years. Maybe you were told you weren't good at math. That anchor might hold you back from trying harder classes, even if you could succeed. Or maybe someone praised you as being so mature, and now you feel pressure to always act put together, even when you're struggling. Anchoring doesn't only come from others. We do it to ourselves. The first way you describe a situation becomes the way you interpret it. You say, "I'm bad at dating," or "I'm not a creative person," and that statement becomes your starting point. Future thoughts adjust around that anchor, rarely challenging it. But just like with prices or negotiations, that initial point may be completely arbitrary. A single failed attempt, a one-time comment, a misunderstanding, and yet it drags on you. This is what makes anchoring bias both powerful and dangerous. We don't just anchor numbers, we anchor beliefs. There's also emotional anchoring, where your first emotional response to something becomes the one you return to. No matter how things change, you walk into a room and feel nervous. You might later associate that room with discomfort. Even if nothing bad ever happened there again, the initial feeling stuck. Now here's the hopeful part. Just as anchors can limit us, new anchors can liberate us. By choosing where to start the story, what number, what label, what emotion, you can change how everything else feels. Start your morning with calm music, and the whole day might feel smoother. Frame your goal not as losing 10 pounds, but as treating your body with kindness, and the journey changes. Anchors aren't truth, they're just points of reference. And when you know where yours are, you can lift them, you can move them, you can set new ones that serve you better. Let's keep going. The next trick shows why your brain gets stuck on unfinished tasks, sometimes for a lifetime. You're lying in bed, the room dim and quiet, but your mind, not so much. It's replaying a half-written text message, a conversation you meant to finish, a task that's been sitting undone on your desk for days. You wonder, why can't I just let it go? Welcome to the Zeigarnik effect, a psychological quirk that causes unfinished tasks to take up more mental space than completed ones. It was first observed in the 1920s by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik. She noticed that waiters in a cafe remembered orders more clearly before the meals were delivered. Once the food hit the table, the memory faded. That single detail sparked a revolution in understanding how memory works. Zeigarnik theorized that when something is incomplete, the mind keeps it on a sort of mental sticky note. It stays open in the background, nudging your attention. Once it's done, the brain lets it go. This explains so much about daily life, why you feel haunted by the email you didn't send, why a half-packed suitcase nags at you more than the trip itself, why that project you abandoned weeks ago still stirs guilt while completed ones quietly fade into the past. It's not about how important something is, it's about whether or not it's finished. That's the trick. Your brain wants closure, and until it gets it, it won't stop tapping your shoulder. This is why cliffhangers in TV shows are so effective. It's why stories that cut off abruptly leave you itching for more. The open loop demands resolution. Marketers and writers use this effect on purpose. A headline says, "She opened the box, and what she found shocked her." Now you have to know. The tension of not knowing pulls your focus, even when you want to look away. But there's another layer to this. It's not just about mental clutter, it's about how unfinished business, especially emotional, can echo for years. Words you didn't say, fights that never resolved, dreams you almost chased but didn't. These things linger, not because they were dramatic, but because they were left open. Let's look deeper at how this effect shapes our memory, our stress, and our sense of control. Think of your mind like a computer. Every incomplete task is an open tab. The more tabs you have open, the slower everything runs. Even if you're not actively thinking about those tasks, they're quietly draining your focus in the background. You might be folding laundry, driving, or brushing your teeth, but part of your mind is chewing on that conversation you need to have, that bill you meant to pay, that letter you never sent. This mental noise isn't just annoying, it's exhausting. Research shows that people perform worse on cognitive tasks when they have unresolved tasks hanging over them. It's as if the brain keeps some of its processing power reserved for those incomplete things, just in case they suddenly become urgent again. And here's the kicker. Sometimes even imagining finishing something isn't enough. The brain wants real closure. Saying, "I'll finish it later," doesn't always silence the noise, but physically checking something off, making progress, even in tiny steps, can provide just enough relief. This is why to-do lists are oddly satisfying. Each time you cross something off, your brain gets to let go. That mental sticky note can finally be peeled off and tossed away. It's also why habits like journaling, closing loops, or even saying things out loud, "I handled that," can help relieve internal tension. The act of acknowledgement matters, but sometimes the Zeigarnik effect doesn't just create mental clutter, it creates emotional residue. Think about unresolved relationships. The apologies that were never made, the feelings that were never expressed. Even if years have passed, the unfinished nature of those moments can tug at your memory with surprising intensity. It's why a single song, scent, or phrase can bring the entire moment back, because your brain never filed it away. It's not just nostalgia, it's the pull of an open loop. The Zeigarnik effect doesn't mean we need to tie up every loose end perfectly, but it does remind us that unfinished things carry weight, and the more of them we carry, the heavier the world feels. But there are ways to let go, even when closure isn't possible. Let's explore that now. Sometimes the story doesn't end neatly. The email remains unsent. The goodbye never happens. The closure you hoped for never arrives. And still your mind circles back again and again, not to punish you, but to resolve something that feels open. The Zeigarnik effect explains this gentle haunting. It's your brain trying to finish a story it never got to complete. But here's the beautiful part. You can give your mind closure, even without resolution. It starts with acknowledgement. If you can't have the conversation, write it down. If the moment has passed, speak it aloud in a quiet room. If the dream slipped away, give it a eulogy in your journal. Why? Because closure isn't about finishing an event. It's about marking that it ended. When you do that, symbolically or literally, your brain often lets it go. This is why rituals are powerful. Lighting a candle, tearing up a letter, leaving flowers. They're small acts that tell the mind, this part is done now. You can also ease the effect by making micro-completions. If the task feels too big, break it into a step so tiny it's almost laughable. Instead of clean the entire garage, try stack the empty boxes. Instead of write the whole paper, try open a new document and type the title. Once you begin, your brain often softens the alarm. It recognizes you're working toward closure, and when closure isn't possible, when the door can't be shut, you can still choose peace. You can say, "I never got to finish this chapter, but I've chosen to turn the page." That is its own kind of ending, one that honors the past without living inside it. The Zeigarnik effect reminds us that open loops matter. They create weight, they generate noise, but they also reveal what we care about, what we notice, what our hearts haven't stopped holding on to. So when you feel stuck, restless, or inexplicably tired, ask yourself what's still open, and then maybe close just one tab. And as your mind grows quieter, let us move on to the next trick, one that explains why we fear losing more than we crave winning. Imagine you're offered a coin toss. Heads, you win $100. Tails, you lose $100. Most people hesitate, not because the math doesn't make sense, but because the emotion does. Losing something, especially something we already have, hurts more than gaining that same thing feels good. This is the heart of loss aversion, a foundational principle in behavioral psychology that explains why the fear of losing often shapes our decisions more than the hope of winning. Studies suggest that the pain of a loss is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of a comparable gain. In other words, losing $100 feels twice as bad as winning $100 feels good. This effect shows up everywhere, often without us realizing it. It's why gamblers are more likely to chase losses than walk away after a win. Why people cling to bad relationships, toxic jobs, or outdated routines. Because even when change is good, loss is still loss. Loss aversion isn't irrational, it's deeply human. Evolution shaped us to avoid danger before we pursued reward. Our ancestors who feared losing food, shelter, or community were more likely to survive. And those instincts echo in our modern lives, even when the stakes are less dramatic. Take pricing, for example. Marketers know this trick well. They don't say, buy now and save $20. They say, don't miss out on $20 in savings. Same deal, but the second version frames it as a loss, and that makes it feel urgent. Even our daily habits reflect this. We're more likely to keep a subscription we no longer use because we don't want to lose the features. We hesitate to throw away old clothes we haven't worn in years because it feels like losing money, even if we're not wearing them anyway. Loss aversion keeps us clinging, hesitating, second-guessing, but it also protects us. It helps us notice what matters. It reminds us of our values. It urges caution when risk feels too high. But what happens when that caution turns into fear? When we miss out on growth because we're trying to avoid pain? Let's go deeper. Loss aversion doesn't just influence what we do, it shapes what we avoid. And what we avoid can become a kind of prison. Imagine you've invested weeks into a project. Maybe it's a business idea, a relationship, a creative goal. It's not working. You know it's not, but the thought of quitting feels unbearable. I've already put in so much time, I can't just walk away now. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy, the irrational tendency to continue something just because you've already invested in it. And it's powered by loss aversion. The moment you walk away, you feel like you're losing everything you've put in, your time, your energy, your money, your identity. But here's the truth, you're not losing what's already gone, you're just deciding not to lose more. Loss aversion can also make simple choices feel monumental. You hold on to an old phone that frustrates you daily because you don't want to waste what you spent. You keep a subscription running just in case. You say yes to invitations, jobs, responsibilities that drain you, because saying no feels like a loss. Even in relationships, this trick of the mind appears. You stay connected to someone who no longer brings peace, joy, or support, because breaking the bond feels like giving something up, even if the bond no longer gives anything back. What you're experiencing is emotional accounting. Your brain is keeping a ledger, even if it's invisible, and that ledger weighs losses more heavily than gains. But what if you rewrote that accounting? What if walking away wasn't seen as losing, but reclaiming? Reclaiming your time, reclaiming your peace, reclaiming space for something new. Loss aversion is a survival instinct, but not everything in your life is a survival situation. You're allowed to start again. You're allowed to close the chapter. You're allowed to let go even when your brain screams that it's too costly. Because sometimes, not letting go is the costliest choice of all. Now let's explore how you can outsmart this bias and reshape the way you think about risk, value, and the future. If loss aversion is wired into us, are we stuck with it? Not exactly. The key to moving through loss aversion isn't to eliminate it, but to understand it, and then reframe the risk. Imagine this. you're offered two choices. Option A, you keep everything the same. No loss, but no gain. Option B, you give something up, but open a door to something better. The instinctive choice: stay where you are, avoid the loss, play it safe. But here's the truth we often forget: staying stuck has a cost too. There's a hidden price in clinging to what no longer serves you. It might be your energy, your peace, your time, your future. And that's where the reframe begins. Instead of asking, what will I lose if I let this go? Try asking, what am I already losing by holding on? This tiny shift in perspective can open space for courage. Because loss isn't always the villain. Sometimes, it's the start of clarity. This is how you outsmart the bias. You remind yourself that comfort is not always safe, that habit is not always health, that letting go is not always failure. And when the fear kicks in, because it will, you don't have to argue with it. You just pause, breathe, and consider this. Everything you've ever gained came after you let go of something. You let go of childhood to step into adulthood. You let go of a version of yourself to grow into the next. You let go of one dream to chase another. We are always releasing, always risking, always reshaping. Loss aversion wants you to freeze, but life wants you to move. So the next time you hesitate, not because something feels wrong, but because you're afraid to lose it, ask yourself, am I protecting something valuable or avoiding something uncomfortable? Then take the step, not recklessly, but bravely, because the truth is, letting go isn't always about loss. Sometimes, it's how we make room for everything we've been waiting for. Let's move on to the next trick, one that explains why even minor flaws can make someone more relatable and more likable. Picture someone who seems perfect. They're confident, polished, articulate, flawless. Even, at first, you might admire them. But over time, something shifts. They start to feel distant, hard to relate to, almost untouchable. Now imagine that same person spills coffee on their shirt during a meeting. They laugh, clean it up, and keep going. Suddenly they seem more human, more approachable, more real. This is the pratfall effect, coined by psychologist Elliot Aronson in the 1960s. The term comes from the word pratfall, meaning a clumsy stumble or mistake. Aronson discovered something surprising. People who are seen as competent become more likable when they make a small mistake. Why? Because perfection intimidates, but imperfection, it builds connection. We don't bond over flawless execution. We bond over humanity. In Aronson's original experiment, participants listened to recordings of a person answering quiz questions. In one version, the person answered confidently and correctly. In another, they did the same, but at the end, they spilled a cup of coffee. Guess what? The coffee spiller was rated as more likable. Same skill, same smarts, but the little stumble made them feel more genuine. This bias runs deep. We trust people more when they admit small mistakes. We relate more easily to those who can laugh at themselves. We feel comforted, not threatened by someone who slips and keeps going. It's why bloopers at the end of a movie make us love the actors more, why a slightly crooked smile is often more endearing than a perfect one, why a well-timed self-deprecating joke puts people at ease. But the pratfall effect isn't just about clumsiness, it's about vulnerability. It's the idea that strength, when softened by imperfection, becomes accessible. We don't want heroes who never fall. We want ones who fall and rise again. But there's a balance to it. Too many mistakes can make someone seem careless, but the right mistake at the right time can create warmth, trust, and connection. In a world that pressures us to be polished, the pratfall effect whispers something else: be real. That's what people remember. Now let's go deeper into why this works and how you can use it to create connection in your own life. Think about the people who make you feel most comfortable. They're probably not the ones who always have the perfect answer, the perfect clothes, or the perfect life. They're the ones who can be both capable and casual, the ones who can impress you and laugh at themselves. This is the sweet spot of the pratfall effect, competence plus vulnerability. We admire strength, but we connect with imperfection. When someone is too perfect, it creates distance. We assume they don't struggle like we do. We compare ourselves and often feel like we fall short. Perfection doesn't inspire, it intimidates. But when that same person slips, just a little, we're reminded that they're human too. And that shift changes everything. It creates trust. It breaks tension. It opens the door to connection. That's why the best speakers and leaders often begin with a small story of failure or awkwardness. It brings the audience closer. It says, I'm not above you, I'm with you. It's also why we tend to favor underdogs in stories, sports, and even politics. When someone stumbles and keeps going, we root for them harder, because we see ourselves in that stumble. And it works in reverse too. If you're trying to build rapport with someone, especially in a new setting, like a first date, a job interview, or a group environment, sharing a small, honest flaw can warm up the room faster than a perfect performance ever could. Just think about it. What feels more trustworthy? A person who says, I've got this all figured out, or I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. Authenticity signals safety. And the pratfall effect shows us that even confidence becomes more powerful when it's paired with a little softness. It also gives you permission to stop chasing flawless. Your slip-ups, your stumbles, your awkward laughs. They're not barriers to being liked. They're often the bridge. We all want to feel seen. And when someone shows even a glimpse of imperfection, it tells us you don't have to be perfect to be valued. Let's explore how you can use this in your own life, without forcing it or faking it. The power of the pratfall effect doesn't come from pretending to be clumsy. It comes from being honest about the little ways you're human. That means embracing, not exaggerating, letting people see a small piece of the real you, without apology. For example, when giving a presentation, you might admit, I always get nervous at the beginning, but I'm excited to talk about this. That moment of truth disarms your audience. It makes them root for you, because they've been nervous too. Or in a friendship, you might say, I'm bad at texting back sometimes, but I really value you. That's not weakness, that's clarity. That's connection. These small admissions build something stronger than perfection ever could. Trust. You don't have to go out of your way to mess up. In fact, the pratfall effect works best when mistakes happen naturally. A mispronounced word, a forgotten detail, a laugh at your own expense. When these flaws appear alongside real competence, they create a full picture, a human picture. There's even research showing that job candidates, who seem highly qualified, are more likable when they make a small mistake in the interview, like spilling water or fumbling a sentence. But when a less qualified person makes the same mistake, it has the opposite effect. That's the key. Competence first, vulnerability second. And in your daily life, this can be freeing. You don't have to obsess over every detail. You don't have to polish every edge. You don't have to pretend you've never stumbled. Because when people see your imperfections, they often feel safe enough to show you theirs. And that is how relationships deepen. It's not about being clumsy on purpose. It's about not hiding when life gets messy. So the next time you flub a line, forget a name, or spill your coffee, don't rush to cover it. Let it happen. Smile. Keep going. You're not losing credibility. You're gaining relatability. Because the truth is, we don't love people because they're perfect. We love them because they feel like us. Let's move on now to a psychological trick that explains why we're drawn to people and products we've simply seen before, even when we don't know why. You walk into a coffee shop in a new city. The menu is different, the face is unfamiliar, but there it is in the pastry case. Your favorite brand of chocolate bar. You weren't planning to buy it, but suddenly you feel drawn to it. Not because it's the best option, but because it's the familiar one. This is the mirror exposure effect, a psychological phenomenon where the more we're exposed to something, the more we tend to like it, even if we didn't like it much to begin with, even if we don't consciously recognize the exposure. It's not about quality, it's about repetition. The idea is simple. Familiar things feel safer, and safe things feel good. This bias was first studied by psychologist Robert Zajonc in the 1960s. He showed participants random symbols, nonsense words in unfamiliar faces. Some were shown more often than others. The results? The more someone saw something, no matter how meaningless, it started to feel likable. It didn't matter if they didn't understand it. It didn't matter if it was neutral or even slightly unpleasant. Repetition created comfort, and this plays out all around us. It's why political candidates plaster their names on every sign, not to inform you, but to make their name feel known. It's why brands use the same jingle over and over again, so that when you're in the aisle, that tune is already echoing in your mind. It's why you might find yourself humming a song you didn't even like, but heard enough times to absorb. The mere exposure effect is subtle, but powerful. It teaches us that familiarity is persuasive, even when we don't notice it happening, and that's the catch. Most of the time, we're not even aware of it. We just feel a quiet preference, a tilt, a leaning. Sometimes we mistake it for instinct or taste, but it's just the comfort of the known. Let's explore how this effect influences your emotions, your relationships, and your daily decisions, often without saying a word. Let's say you meet someone new at work. You don't talk much, just a nod in the hallway, but as the days go by, those nods become a kind of rhythm. You start feeling comfortable with them, not because you know them, but because you keep seeing them. That's the mere exposure effect at work in your social life. We tend to like people more when we see them frequently. Even casual, low-effort interactions build social familiarity, which our brains interpret as safety. The person becomes part of our mental landscape. It's not magic, it's evolution. Back in early human societies, survival often depended on knowing who was familiar and who was a stranger. Strangers could mean danger. Familiar faces meant belonging, predictability, shared norms, and over time our brains started associating repeated exposure with comfort and comfort with trust. This is why repeated exposure can even change how we feel about someone we initially disliked. At first, a coworker's voice might irritate you, but after weeks of hearing them in meetings, it doesn't bother you as much. Then maybe you start enjoying their input. They haven't changed. You have, through repetition. It happens in relationships too. Friendships often begin through mere proximity. You sat next to each other in class. You lived down the hall. You rode the same bus. The closeness wasn't chosen. It happened. But repeated exposure transforms strangers into companions. Marketers use this to build trust in brands. You might not remember the first few times you saw a company's logo, but after the 10th or 15th time, it starts to feel like something you know. And what you know, you often prefer. This is also why social media creators try to post frequently. Every post is an exposure. Every view builds familiarity, not necessarily approval, but a sense of presence, and that presence leads to comfort. The effect is quiet, creeping, cumulative. You don't have to love something to start liking it. You just have to see it often enough that it stops feeling foreign. But there's a dark side too, because repetition can also trick us into trusting what isn't trustworthy, into believing what isn't true. Let's explore that next. The mere exposure effect doesn't judge. It doesn't ask if something is true, useful, or good. It simply rewards repetition, and that can be dangerous, because once we like something, even a little, we start to trust it. And once we trust it, we stop questioning it, all because we've seen it before. This is how misinformation spreads. A headline, repeated often enough, can start to feel true just because it's familiar. It doesn't matter if it's fact-checked or challenged. The more it shows up, the more the brain starts nodding, not because it agrees, but because it recognizes. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. When repetition makes falsehoods feel real, we see it in politics, in advertising, in social media echo chambers, and it's why algorithms often prioritize engagement over accuracy. They show us what we've seen before, because we're more likely to click, and the more we click, the more familiar it becomes. Until our preferences aren't choices, they're habits shaped by repetition, but this effect can also be used deliberately for healing. You can surround yourself with affirmations, kindness, music, art, anything you want to grow more familiar. You can retrain your brain to find comfort in what once felt awkward or unfamiliar. Start small, repeat a new routine long enough, and your resistance fades. Revisit a forgotten dream regularly, and it starts to feel possible again. Speak kindly to yourself, day after day, and even if you don't believe it yet, your brain begins to listen. This is the beauty of the mere exposure effect. It's a tool, a brush you can use to paint your inner world, but only if you choose what to expose yourself to, intentionally. So the next time something feels right, ask yourself, do I truly value this, or have I just seen it enough to stop questioning it? And if there's something you want to love, a habit, a goal, a part of yourself, expose your mind to it gently, often kindly. Repetition creates comfort, comfort creates trust, and trust creates change. Now let's explore the next mental bias, one that explains why we so often hold on to things simply because they're already ours. You're holding a coffee mug. It's plain, maybe a little chipped, nothing fancy, but it's yours. You've had it for years, and if someone offered to buy it from you for $5, you might say no, even though deep down you know you wouldn't pay more than $2 for it yourself. This is the endowment effect, a psychological tendency to overvalue the things we already own, just because they belong to us. It's not about market value, it's about personal attachment. Once we possess something, an object, an idea, even a routine, it becomes part of our identity, and that makes it harder to let go. The effect was studied by psychologists Daniel Kahneman, Jack Netsch, and Richard Taylor. In one experiment, participants were given a simple coffee mug. Later, they were asked to sell it. On average, sellers demanded twice as much as buyers were willing to pay. Same mug, same room, but ownership inflated the value. And it doesn't just apply to things, it applies to ideas, beliefs, plans. Once we own a viewpoint, it becomes harder to challenge. Once we own a way of doing things, we resist alternatives. Even if the alternatives are better, we cling, not because it's rational, but because letting go feels like loss. And as we explored earlier, our brains are wired to avoid loss at all costs. This is why decluttering is emotionally difficult, why we keep clothes we haven't worn in years, why it's hard to end a project, a plan, or a partnership, even if it no longer serves us. It's not about usefulness, it's about ownership. And the longer we've had something, the more deeply we feel it's ours, and the more we believe it has value. But is that value real, or is it just emotional gravity? Let's go deeper. Because once you recognize the endowment effect, you can begin to make clearer, more freeing choices about what to keep and what to release. Think about the last time you cleaned out a closet. Maybe you came across a sweater you haven't worn in 3 years. It doesn't fit quite right. It's not your style anymore. And yet, you hesitate. You paid for it. You've had it for years. You wore it on that one memorable trip. Something whispers, don't get rid of it, you might need it. That voice, that hesitation, that's the endowment effect. We assign emotional value to things because they're ours, not because they're useful, not because they bring joy, but simply because they've been with us long enough to feel familiar. This is how we end up weighed down by old habits, cluttered homes, and crowded calendars. We confuse possession with value, and it happens far beyond physical stuff. We stay in jobs that drain us because we've already invested years. We continue with routines that don't serve us because they're ours. We defend opinions we're not even sure we believe anymore because we've owned them for too long to imagine letting them go. The endowment effect blurs our ability to make objective decisions. It tells us, this is mine, therefore it must be worth keeping. But here's the shift. Value doesn't come from ownership. It comes from alignment. Does this thing, this belief, this object, this plan, align with who you are now? Does it support your present, your peace, your path forward? If the answer is no, then maybe its only real value was in what it taught you, not in what it continues to offer. That's the part the endowment effect hides from us. It whispers, to let go is to lose, but often to let go is to lighten. You are not obligated to keep everything you once chose. Not every version of you was choosing from a place of wisdom or wholeness. You're allowed to revise, to release, to reimagine, because ownership isn't identity, and letting go isn't erasure, it's evolution. Let's explore how to soften this attachment and start seeing clearly again. So how do you move past the endowment effect? How do you release what no longer serves you, without guilt, without confusion, without regret? It starts with a simple question. If I didn't already own this, would I want it now? That question cuts through the illusion of value created by attachment. It helps you shift from history to present need. Not did this once matter, but does it still belong? You can use this question when decluttering your space, but it's just as powerful for decluttering your life. Look at your calendar. If that weekly obligation weren't already part of your routine, would you choose to add it? Look at your relationships. If that connection weren't already established, would you still seek it today? Look at your beliefs. If that idea weren't part of your past, would you still carry it forward? You're not disrespecting your history by letting things go. You're honoring your growth. There's also power in ritual release. Just as the brain forms emotional bonds through ownership, it can find peace through conscious farewell. Write a goodbye note to the version of you who needed that thing. Thank the object, the idea, the habit, for what it gave you, then let it go. Burn the note, donate the item, clear the calendar. It's not about loss, it's about clarity, and sometimes what you'll find underneath the clutter is space, breath, possibility. The endowment effect isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. It protects your past, but your job is to protect your present. You can respect what brought you here without feeling bound to carry all of it forward. So ask yourself, with kindness, not judgment, is this still mine, or is it just something I've been holding? And if the answer brings a small sense of freedom, listen to it, because the lighter you travel, the more room you have to grow. Next, let's explore the way our minds distort memory, why we don't remember things accurately, but rather through two specific moments that shape our entire impression. Think back to your last vacation. You might not remember every detail, not the taxi rides, the meals, or every sunset, but you probably remember one standout moment, the peak, maybe a thrilling experience, a breathtaking view, a burst of laughter, and then you probably remember how it ended. That's the peak end rule, a mental shortcut where we judge experiences not by how long they lasted, but by the most intense moment and the final moment. Coined by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, this rule explains why your brain doesn't create a full timeline of every event. Instead, it snapshots the highlights, especially the emotional highs and the ending, and uses those fragments to decide how it felt overall. In one of his famous studies, participants were asked to endure two uncomfortable experiences. In one, they submerged their hand in icy water for 60 seconds. In the other, they did the same, but at the end, the water was made slightly warmer for the final 30 seconds. Most people preferred the second experience. Even though it was longer, the nicer ending made it feel better overall. The intensity of the discomfort didn't change, just how it ended. Our brains aren't perfect historians. They're storytellers, and the stories they tell are shaped by emotionally charged peaks and how things wrap up. This explains a lot about our preferences. Why a long, mostly pleasant movie can feel meh if it ends badly. Why a difficult task can be remembered fondly if it finishes with a sense of triumph. Why relationships that end in chaos often overshadow years of warmth. It's not always fair, but it's how memory works. We remember the punchline, not the setup, the final note, not the whole song. This insight is powerful, because it means we can shape how things are remembered, not by making every moment perfect, but by paying attention to the peaks and being intentional about the endings. Let's explore how the peak end rule plays out in daily life and how you can use it to create better memories and softer goodbyes. The peak end rule isn't just a quirk of memory, it's a tool for shaping experience, without changing a single detail of what actually happened. Because while we can't always control every part of an event, we can influence what our minds choose to keep. Let's start with something simple. A dinner party. Maybe the food was fine, the conversation average, but if there was one burst of shared laughter, or a moment where the music hit just right, that becomes the peak. Now end the night with a warm hug at the door, a thoughtful thank you message the next morning, and suddenly, the memory of the whole night feels glowing, not because every moment was magical, but because the ending was. That's the peak end rule in action. It shows up in childhood too. Kids often don't remember every vacation or every birthday, but they remember the moment of surprise, the gift they didn't expect, the laugh until you cry moment, and how the day ended. Even in healthcare, this effect matters. Patients in studies have been shown to rate painful procedures as less unpleasant when the experience ends with reduced discomfort, even if the overall pain was longer. Doctors and nurses use this knowledge to create gentler closing moments, knowing it reshapes how the whole thing is remembered. And what about in breakups, in quitting jobs, in saying goodbye, how something ends, whether it's a conversation, a trip, a relationship, can linger longer than the bulk of the experience. A kind ending can soften a hard road. A harsh ending can poison a beautiful journey. This isn't about faking positivity. It's about closing loops with care, because we carry those closing moments, sometimes for years. You don't have to perfect every experience. Just ask yourself, what's the highlight someone might remember, and how does this end? In doing so, you become the author of your own emotional timeline. You can build memory, not through perfection, but through emotional punctuation. Let's explore how to apply this in your everyday life, from daily routines to milestone events, so you can make even small moments feel meaningful. Once you understand the peak end rule, you start to see life a little differently. You realize that you don't have to control the entire experience to shape how it's remembered. You only need to be intentional about two moments, the peak and the end. This works in small everyday rituals. End your morning routine with something comforting, a moment of stillness, your favorite music, a mindful breath. That's what your mind will remember about the start of the day. Finish your workday with a small closing ceremony. Tidy your space, write tomorrow's to-do list, shut your laptop with intention. Now the day has a soft edge instead of a frayed one. This also applies to relationships. A tough conversation doesn't need to be flawless, but if it ends with kindness, with "thank you for hearing me," or "I'm glad we talked," that becomes the tone your memory leans toward. And for parents, bedtime stories, last hugs, silly songs, those are the final notes your child hears before sleep. They won't remember every moment of the day, but they'll remember how the day ended with you. Even in solo experiences, this rule matters. If a workout ends with stretching and soothing music, you're more likely to look forward to it next time. If a walk ends at your favorite overlook, you'll associate it with peace, not just effort. It doesn't take much, just one moment of beauty, one gentle closing gesture, one pause to acknowledge, this is how it ends. You don't have to micromanage every second, just frame it, like putting a painting in a gold frame. The edges change how the whole thing feels. And when things go wrong, when a day is messy, a trip is stressful, a meeting is awkward, remember it's not over until the ending comes. You still have a chance to shape how it's remembered, because memory isn't a timeline, it's a story, and stories are remembered for how they made us feel, especially at the peak and at the end. Next, we'll look at why your brain looks for evidence to confirm what it already believes, even if that belief is completely wrong. Imagine this. You believe that people are generally untrustworthy. You read a news story about someone lying, and without hesitation, you nod and think, exactly. That's how people are. But when you hear about someone doing something kind or selfless, you might think, that's nice, but probably rare. This is confirmation bias, the brain's tendency to seek out, favor, and remember information that supports what it already believes, while ignoring or downplaying what doesn't. It's one of the most powerful and pervasive psychological biases we experience, and it shapes how we see everything. We don't always seek truth, we seek agreement. Confirmation bias happens because your brain craves certainty. It doesn't like contradictions. When you believe something, your brain wants to protect that belief, so it looks for proof to back it up. And if it finds something that supports your viewpoint, it latches on. If it finds something that challenges it, it often dismisses it or avoids thinking too deeply about it. This happens in big things, like politics, religion, or identity, but also in small, everyday choices. Let's say you think a coworker doesn't like you. You'll notice every glance, every comment, every moment of silence as proof they're cold or judgmental. Meanwhile, the times they smiled or said something kind, your brain brushes it off as coincidence. You can see confirmation bias in the way we Google things too. We don't search for neutral information. We search in ways that already assume the answer. Instead of "is coffee good or bad for you?" we type "why coffee is bad for you," and guess what we find? It's not that the evidence isn't out there. It's that our questions filter what we're even willing to see, and once we see what we expected, our brain rewards us with a little hit of satisfaction. See, I was right. But what if being right isn't the goal? What if truth, growth, and understanding require us to challenge the very stories we keep trying to confirm? Let's look deeper at how confirmation bias narrows our world and how to gently widen it again. Imagine your beliefs like a lens, one you wear all the time, often without realizing it. Everything you see is filtered through it. Information that fits your worldview comes in bright and clear. Everything else, it gets blurred, faded, or ignored. That's what confirmation bias does. It doesn't just affect what you believe, it affects what you notice, what you remember, and what you even allow yourself to question. Take relationships, for example. If you believe your partner is inconsiderate, your mind will quietly collect evidence. They forgot to pick up milk? Proof. They didn't text back quickly? More proof. But when they do something thoughtful, bring you coffee, send a kind message, you might see it as a fluke. Because when confirmation bias is at work, even kindness gets filtered out if it doesn't fit the story you've already decided is true. This happens in arguments too. Each side believes they're being rational, but they're really listening through filters. They hear what confirms their position, and either ignore or instantly discredit everything else. This isn't always intentional. It's just how the brain simplifies a complicated world, and social media, it supercharges this effect. Algorithms show you more of what you already agree with, not because it's true, but because it keeps you engaged. If you click on one article, one post, one video that aligns with your view, you'll likely be shown more of the same. Before long, it feels like everyone agrees with you, and anyone who doesn't must be uninformed, irrational, or extreme. Your world shrinks, not because the world is shrinking, but because your information stream has narrowed. The danger of confirmation bias is that it makes us overconfident. We stop questioning, we stop listening, we assume we already know, but knowing and learning are not the same. And curiosity can't live in a mind that already has all the answers. So how do we escape this trap? How do we stay open without feeling lost? Let's explore a few gentle ways to challenge confirmation bias without attacking ourselves or giving up what we care about. Escaping confirmation bias doesn't mean you have to stop having opinions. It doesn't mean you need to doubt everything or abandon what you believe in. It just means choosing curiosity over certainty, especially when the truth might surprise you. One way to start is by asking better questions. Instead of "how am I right about this?" try asking, "what would someone who disagrees with me say?" or "what am I not seeing?" You don't have to agree with the answers. You just have to be willing to hear them. This creates mental space, room for ideas to breathe and evolve. Another approach, actively seek out information that challenges your views, not to argue with it, not to disprove it, but to understand it. You can even try something simple when reading an article or hearing an opinion. Ask yourself, what if the opposite were true? That question alone can soften your grip. It won't always change your mind, but it opens it just enough to keep learning. And remember, you're not weak for adjusting your perspective. You're wise. Growth doesn't mean betraying your past beliefs. It means honoring your ability to learn. You can carry a belief for years and still decide this no longer fits who I am. That's not flip-flopping. That's evolving. And when you do encounter disagreement, pause before reacting. Ask yourself, am I listening to understand or just to confirm what I already think? Sometimes just noticing the bias is enough to loosen its grip. Awareness is powerful. It brings your mind out of autopilot. You stop looking for proof and start looking for truth. And in a world that's full of noise, full of people shouting to be right, quiet reflection becomes a kind of rebellion. So as you move through the world, keep this simple invitation in mind. What if I'm only seeing part of the picture? And what might open up if I look beyond it? Let's continue now to the next mental shortcut that explains why the first impression can color everything that follows. You meet someone new. They have a warm smile, firm handshake, stylish clothes. Immediately you think they must be smart, kind, trustworthy. You've only seen one small part of them, but already your mind is filling in the rest. That's the halo effect. It's a psychological bias where our impression of one positive trait, like attractiveness, confidence, or charm, spills over into how we perceive unrelated traits. Someone who looks good must be good. Someone who speaks well must also lead well. Someone who's confident must also be capable. It's not always accurate, but your brain likes shortcuts, and this one is especially seductive. The term was first coined by psychologist Edward Thorndike in 1920. He noticed that when military officers were rating soldiers, a good score in one area, like appearance or demeanor, tended to raise scores in all other areas, even if the soldier's performance didn't justify it. The halo from one positive trait blurred the rest. You see this all the time in daily life. A celebrity gives a heartfelt interview, and suddenly they're seen as a role model, even if they've never done anything beyond perform. A politician delivers a moving speech, and people assume they're ethical before they've even read their policies. Even in dating, the halo effect shows up. If someone's physically attractive, we might also believe they're more intelligent, funny, or emotionally stable, long before we have any real evidence. This isn't about vanity. It's about mental efficiency. Your brain wants to make fast, easy judgments, so it takes one glowing piece of information and lets it light up everything around it. But here's the problem. That glow can blind you. You might trust the wrong people, overlook red flags, hire based on charisma instead of competence, or underestimate someone just because they lack that initial glow. Because the halo effect works in reverse too. One perceived flaw can cast a shadow over everything else. Let's look deeper at how the halo effect shapes your choices, your relationships, and your self-image, often without you even knowing. The halo effect is subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers, nudging your thoughts before you've had a chance to examine them. And the danger, it can make you trust too quickly or dismiss too easily. Let's say you're at work. A colleague you admire, confident, articulate, well-dressed, shares an idea. You immediately assume it's smart, effective, maybe even brilliant. Now imagine someone less charismatic shares the same idea. Mumbled words, awkward posture, wrinkled shirt. Do you see the idea the same way? Probably not. Because the person's presentation became a lens. It either polished the message or dulled it. That's the halo effect. It can cloud your judgment, making style seem like substance. It happens in education too. Studies show that students perceived as attractive are often assumed to be more intelligent by teachers, even when their performance is the same. And it happens inside your own head. If you think of yourself as bad at math, for example, that flaw might cast a shadow over your overall self-worth. One perceived weakness distorts your whole self-image. You begin to believe, if I'm bad at this, maybe I'm just not smart. But strengths can do the same in reverse. You succeed at something, and suddenly, you feel unstoppable. You take more risks, speak up more, pursue more. Because belief creates behavior, and behavior shapes outcome. That's the power of perception. It's not neutral, it's magnetic, pulling your thoughts toward it. The halo effect can also shape how we treat others. We forgive mistakes more easily when we like someone. We assume good intentions. We give second chances. But when someone rubs us the wrong way at first glance, we might interpret everything they do through a lens of suspicion or criticism, even if they're doing their best. This bias isn't about malice. It's about efficiency. Your brain is trying to process complexity with speed, so it simplifies, sometimes too much. But once you spot the glow, you can start to separate the light from the truth. Let's explore how to work with this bias consciously, so you can see people, situations, and yourself more clearly. So how do we move beyond the halo effect? It starts with one simple shift. Separate the trait from the person. When someone impresses you, pause and ask, what exactly impressed me? Was it their confidence, their appearance, their tone? Then ask, does that automatically mean they're kind, skilled, honest? It's not about doubting everyone. It's about slowing the shortcut. You can still admire someone's charm, but you don't have to let it rewrite every other detail. This awareness protects you from misplaced trust and also from unfair assumptions in the other direction. Because remember, the halo effect also works in reverse. If someone seems awkward or aloof at first, you might unconsciously decide they're cold, lazy, or unfriendly. But maybe they're just nervous. Maybe they're thoughtful, kind, brilliant, just quiet. The more you challenge your first impressions, the more room you give people to be who they really are, not who your brain decided they must be. This matters in how we see ourselves too. Sometimes we let one flaw define us. A single mistake becomes our identity. One area of struggle colors the way we view everything else. I failed at this, so maybe I'm not cut out for that either. I'm awkward in groups, so maybe I'm just bad with people. I don't look like them, so maybe I'm not worth as much. But you are not one trait. You are not one moment. You are not a shadow or a spotlight. You are a whole human. And every person you meet is too. So the next time someone shines, don't assume the glow tells the whole story. And when someone doesn't shine right away, don't assume there's no light inside. Give them a second look. Give yourself a second look. Because the truth is rarely found in a flash. It's revealed over time.
Thank you for joining us here on Mindlight Mixtape. If this sparked something for you, visit our channel. There's so much more to explore.